All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Daniel Baer, and I'm the event facilitator with McNally Robinson Booksellers. And before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are on Treaty 1 territory, and that the land on which we are gathered is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Aninilwak, Anishinaabe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, as well as the homeland of the Red River Métis. And additionally, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. And of course, we are delighted to welcome our featured guest, Terry O'Reilly, to Winnipeg in support of his newest book, Against the Grain, Defiant Giants Who Changed the World. Let's give a round of applause for Terry. Of course, we're grateful to HarperCollins Canada as well for making this event a reality, and for Greg Mackling coming on board to host. Let's give another round of applause. So to give you a sense of how the evening will go, there's going to be a presentation from Terry, followed by a conversation with Terry and Craig. After which, there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions. So if you do have a question tonight, just raise your hand enough for me to see. And I'll come by with this wireless microphone just to ensure that you're heard on tonight's live stream for the cameras and for those who are watching at home. Also watching the Jays game as well. And then, of course, I'll be back at the very end of the presentation just to review signing procedure, which is going to take place over on my right here. But of course, I'll be back at the end for that. But for now, I have the pleasure of introducing tonight's hosts. Greg Mackling, co-host of the 680 CJOB morning show, The Start, with Brett McGarry, and co-host of the Blue Bombers halftime show. A proud husband and father of twin boys, Greg is a passionate advocate for mental health and wellness, openly sharing his journey with brain injury and depression. Fiercely proud of Manitoba, he supports community causes, including as spokesperson for the St. Boniface Hospital Foundation annual lottery, as well as a member of the board of directors for the Manitoba Hockey Hall of Fame. And our featured guest, Terry O'Reilly, is the winner of hundreds of international advertising awards, is an in-demand speaker, and the best-selling author of The Age of Persuasion, This I Know, and My Best Mistake. Finalist for the National Business Book Award. His highly awarded radio programs, O'Reilly on Advertising, The Age of Persuasion, and Under the Influence, have been broadcast on CBC Radio since 2005, and his podcast has been downloaded over 40 million times. Terry O'Reilly lives outside of Huntsville, Ontario. Please join me in welcoming Terry O'Reilly.
I should have read it before tonight, and then I wouldn't have come. Already. I was trying to imagine the headline tomorrow. Terry O'Reilly, the man more popular than baseball, at least with this many people. But you are an absolute Blue Jays fanatic.
Yeah. My wife and I have watched 160 games this year.
Oh,
Yeah.
So you folks need to be really honored. Terry's here and didn't play hooky today.
Blue Jay fever.
Yes, exactly. I'm sure he was tempted to do just that. So are we good?
Yeah, so I'm going to give you this one.
All right.
Switch that one out for the other.
That happened during my high school graduation during the valedictorian address as well. I wasn't the valedictorian, but the microphone did die. So the book is Terry O'Reilly's Against the Grain, Defiant Giants Who Changed the World. Terry, why do we hate change so much?
Why do we hate change so
Yes.
much? That's an interesting first question. I've always believed, firsthand because I've experienced it, that the world's default position when faced with a brand new idea is rejection, always. Which is so interesting to me because the world needs change, needs new ideas. But the first default reaction always is no. And even in my little world of advertising and marketing, I mean, the people I write about are heroic, but in my small world, whenever we walked into a boardroom with a big, great, fresh, scary idea to present to clients, they always said no. So what you had to become great was you had to become a great presenter in the boardroom because you had to be able to turn people around on an idea when their initial reaction, sometimes very firmly, is no.
The best pitch you ever gave that ultimately led to a no, that never saw the light of day, that ended up on the proverbial cutting room floor.
Have you got an hour?
Yeah. Just one, you have to pick one.
Oh,
You don't have to even pick the best, just one that you got a good story. Because you don't know how to do that.
Let me just think about that for a second now. That's a good story. I'll tell you one that's kind of a flip story.
I love it.
So we were asked to advertise this wine called Pied d'Or. You may know the wine. It's a white wine, French wine. So we created this ad, Greg, that I thought was great. It's a television commercial. We kind of made it look like a French film with subtitles. It was just a really lovely little idea to enhance the Frenchness of this wine. We presented it to the client. Client tore it to pieces, then put it back together in a Frankenstein way that I didn't even recognize the idea anymore. And when it came time to go to Paris to shoot the commercial, I refused to go because I stamped on my principles and said, what this commercial has become is not going to be good, and I don't want to be any part of it. So everybody else went off to Paris, and I just stayed in my office alone with my typewriter. And
your principles, don't forget.
And my principles, thank you for that. When the commercial came back, I looked at it, it was horrible, exactly as I thought. And they put the commercial on the air, and Pied d'Or sells out every time that commercial airs. They have to pull the commercial because they've run out of product.
Oh my God.
And this is the X factor of creativity. You never really, it's slippery, you can't get your hands around it. And one funny addendum to this story is years later, Debbie, my wife, and I are in a restaurant, and the waiter asks us if we want some wine, and my wife's a white wine drinker, I'm a red wine drinker, and he says, can I suggest a white wine to you? My wife says, sure, and he says, how about Pied d'Or? And I roll my eyes, and he goes, I'm sorry, you don't like that one? And my wife goes, ignore him, he wrote a commercial for it that he hates, I'll take it, and he goes, was it the commercial with the subtitles? And my wife goes, yes. She goes, I love that commercial. And there's one more addendum to this. So he eventually goes into the kitchen, you know, the swinging doors in the kitchen with the porthole. And my wife goes, look behind you right now. And I look behind, I look in the little window, and there's this waiter with the chef like, to this day, I hate that commercial. You can find it on YouTube. It's horrible.
Oh, bless you.
So you never know.
Great story. Love that. Thank you. How did you get into advertising? What was the spark that lit the fire?
I always say that the seed was probably planted. When I was 4 years old, I was on Romper Room. You remember that show? Yes. And one day the director said to my mom, could we borrow Terry, and because we're shooting a commercial in the next studio, can we borrow him to put him in the commercial? And my mom said, okay. And I was brought into this room, and this is like 1963, don't do the math, but it's like, you know, early black and white television. I was put at a table like that one over there, and there was a sandwich there, and there was an announcer talking about this local bakery. He said, okay, Terry, all you gotta do is eat the sandwich. And so I did that. And that commercial aired in Sudbury, where I was born and raised, for the next like 3 or 4 years. So it was that weird thing of being 7 and seeing myself as a 4-year-old. But it was thrilling, just thrilling for me as a kid. And I think the seed for advertising was planted there because it was so thrilling for me as a kid. So I went to Ryerson for radio and television. I knew I wanted to be in broadcast somewhere. I didn't know where. Every Wednesday, we'd have someone come in from the industry to tell us about their career. So we'd have documentary filmmakers would come in and talk to us about their job. I remember Lloyd Robertson came in to talk about announcing the news. And one day, the Friendly Giant came in, which is a great story too, because the professor brought this man in with a 3-piece suit and glasses and said, here's our guest speaker this morning. I'm not going to tell you who it is. You have to figure it out. And we're all kind of looking at him, and he opens up a briefcase and takes his tie off and puts it in the briefcase. And then he takes his glasses off and puts them in the briefcase, and takes his jacket off. And we're just looking at him. And then he takes out a comb and combs his hair all straight down and all the way. And then he pulls out his recorder and started playing the theme to the Friendly Giant, and we just fell apart because we've all grown up with him. Anyway, he came in and talked to us about doing children's programming. And one day, 2 advertising people came in. And they started talking about what it was like to be an ad person, about coming up with creative selling ideas and strategies and products and brands and studios and actors and celebrities and film shoots. And I sat in the back of that classroom when I saw my future. I said, I'm going to be an ad.
Wow. That's yeah, it's magic when that happens, when you see your future in that instant. I'm very jealous that you were able to find that, because mine would have been to be playing in Montreal or coaching in Montreal today with the Blue Bombers, but the backup plan worked out not too badly. Disney. I marvel at how Disney has managed to convince millions of people to spend the 2 weeks of holidays they have, to charge, finance, or spend thousands of dollars to travel to Florida, France, Japan, California, to wait in line with cranky kids, their own and others. I'll give them that. And then come home and tell the story. It's the happiest place on earth. The promise and delivering within those 3 words is magical, but to back it up is stupendous.
It is, and I think Walt Disney himself was a great marketer, not just a visionary, but a great marketer. I mean, he built Disneyland, really, Disney World, really to sell his movies, right? He really had a strategy in mind to do that. And there's something magical, as you know, about the Disney franchise and the movies and the TV shows, The Wonderful World of Disney we watched growing up, that I think is pretty fascinating. And I'll say this about Walt Disney. He really understood kids. The same way the Friendly Giant did. Like the Friendly Giant show was 15 minutes long, which I never realized until he told us that. In my mind, it was like an hour of just wonderfulness. It was 15 minutes because he thought that was a 4-year-old child's attention span. And I think Walt had that same appreciation. I once did a print ad for Eastern Airlines, if you remember that airline. And it was this beautiful photo of a little girl with Mickey Mouse ears on. And the headline was, "Use a 5-year-old excuse to go to Walt Disney World." And I think that like parents want to know, because that magic was instilled in them.
Yeah, it's special. And then so that slogan or that mantra or that motto and that economy of words, I marvel at it. What does it take to harness that, to find that magical combination of 3 or 4 words? Or I was listening to your latest episode of Under the Influence today. Good podcast, by the way. It's the first time I've listened today. I'm just kidding. I've been listening. I've listened, I think, to every episode. Slogans and billboards and 7 words and capturing someone's attention.
So difficult. Coming up with a slogan is really difficult. It's probably one of the most difficult tasks in marketing. I never thought I was that good at it, quite frankly. There were people that were much better at that than me. Billboards, the same thing. The rule is basically 7 words or less, because you have to be able to take it in while you're driving by it at 60 kilometers an hour. Right? I love the challenge of billboards. It's a funny thing to say, but never loved the challenge of coming up with slogans or taglines. But taglines are, I mean, the good ones last forever. It's an interesting thing to me. Like "Finger Licking Good" is really old. That's an ancient slogan that's still used to this day. "Just Do It" for Nike is one of those really interesting slogans to me, because 80% of the people who wear Nikes do not work out. That's an interesting stat, right? So why do they wear Nike? Why are they wearing fitness shoes when they don't work out? And part of that is the slogan, because "Just Do It" is about, it can be applied to, should I ask her to marry me? Should I start my own company? Is it time to buy my house? Should I have children? Like, that line speaks to a lot of big, existential questions we have in our life. I think people are just attracted to that. Do it, like, take a chance, like, jump in the net will appear. It's got that positivity. And it sounds like there's no excuses. It's like, get off the couch, is what that line is saying. And that's why Nike is one of the biggest companies in the world. Apple has never really had a tagline, which is they've used various ones, like Think Different, but they haven't really hung their brand on a slogan. Yet they're one of the most powerful companies in the world, most successful. So sometimes you need one, sometimes they're really powerful, and sometimes you don't at all.
I worked at home during the pandemic, And that was a challenge. Technology now, though, does allow a radio broadcast to take place live from just about anywhere. And the pandemic sped that up. But I am so jealous of where you do your program from. For those that don't know and those that do, can you take us on a little bit of a tour?
Yeah, so we moved out of Toronto about 2 hours north of Toronto at one point. And I would have to drive back into Toronto once a week to record the show. So it's about maybe 2 hours and 20-minute ride in and 2 hours and 20-minute ride home to record a half-hour show. So it would take an entire day. And most of that driving was, if you've ever driven in Toronto, it's inching on the 427. It's just inching, and it was killing me. I did it for more than 10 years. It really aged me, I think. I think I even had hair before I started that commute. And I was commiserating with my wife, Debbie, one morning. I just done a show recently on brands I love, and one of them was Airstreams. Because I love the aesthetic of Air. I'm not a trailer guy, but the aesthetic of an Airstream I've always loved. You know, you can spot them, they're aluminum, they're shiny, the brownness of them. I love the history of Airstream because, you know, the stat is something like over 70% of Airstreams built since the late 1930s are still on the road.
Oh, wow.
Because they don't rust.
Right.
They're airplane aluminum. Anyway, we were talking about that one day, and my wife said to me, could you create a recording studio in an Airstream trailer? And I thought, oh my God, what a great idea that is. Because we had a cottage and a home, so we wouldn't be tethered to Toronto. We would just take our studio with us back and forth or wherever we were. So we started our hunt for an Airstream. I wanted a vintage 60s Airstream, and we managed to find one actually not far from our home in another town. Then I started the search for someone who could restore an Airstream. And then I had to find another search for someone who could create a recording studio in an Airstream. So I found a lot of people that restore Airstreams and nobody that does recording studios inside of Airstreams. And then one day, Greg, I was on searching the internet, and I find him. He does both. He restores Airstreams and creates editing suites for Hollywood studios, and I guess beautiful Airstreams for actors when they're on location. And I'm scrolling down to say, where in California are you? And I get to the bottom of his web page, and he's in Nova Scotia. He's a transplanted Californian who had vacationed in Nova Scotia, fell in love with the place, and then parked there. So I called him up. I said, have you ever done a radio studio inside an Airstream trailer? And he said, no, I've done lots of editing suites, etc., because I'd love to try it. And I said, okay, I'm bringing my Airstream up to you. And Debbie and I had never pulled this Airstream in our lives before, a trailer. Pulled it out to Nova Scotia. Part of that journey was on a ferry. Our rule when stopping at Tim Hortons was I had to be able to drive right through it because I didn't know how to back up a trailer. And we left it with him for a year. And when we went back after 1 year, as we drove into his property, I saw it sitting there. I couldn't believe it. I was looking at it. It looked brand new. Brand new. It looked like it was 1969 again. And inside was the most beautiful recording studio. So every podcast, every CBC episode you hear of our show and our other podcasts on our podcast network that we have are all recorded in that.
It's a sort of a family business now, isn't it?
The Apostrophe Podcast Company is a family business. That's right. So two of our daughters, Debbie and myself, are the equal partners in that company, and we create podcasts. So we have probably 4 or 5 different podcasts that are available now. Yeah.
Debbie's here, by the way,
Yeah.
tonight. Debbie?
Producer of our network. And
She's right here. She's in the front row, as you might expect.
And she keeps a lot of trains on a lot of tracks, I'm going to tell you. She keeps the whole enterprise together.
So, against the grain, Defiant Giants who changed the world. Have you got any amendments to chapter 2 on Taylor Swift that you'd like to hand out tonight? Because I know you had a hard time getting that chapter done.
I must have revised that chapter over 20 times. Because I would finish the chapter and then I would just read something that she'd broken another record or broken another norm or just achieved something. So I revised it, put it aside, start another chapter, something else would pop up. I had to do it over 20 times. She is, to my mind, the ultimate math. And I was after really interesting mavericks for this book. So for example, as many of you may know, Taylor Swift lost the rights to her master recordings because of record contracts, the same old story that most artists go through. She wanted to buy them back, they wouldn't let her, so what does she do? She re-records full albums. Nobody does that. Artists may record a hit song, not full albums, so nobody does that. She does things like bringing her fans into her homes for listening parties. Nobody does that. I saw her on Graham Norton one night talking about this. I could see the horror on Graham Norton's face as she described bringing fans into her home. Even all the other celebrities on the couch were just like this. Like I just couldn't imagine doing that. And she said, I love my fans. Like we have the most fun you could ever imagine. And then she goes out on her Eras tour, this big world tour that she finished recently. And what does she do? She creates and funds a major motion picture about the tour and puts it out while she's on tour. So you would think, who would do that? Because you think it's going to eat into ticket sales. Because why go to the concert when you can sit at home in your jammies and watch it on your big screen? No, it fed ticket sales. And she paid for the whole motion picture herself. Then she distributed that movie right around the world without a movie studio. Her own company distributed. Like I don't think, and I maintain that Springsteen and McCartney would never even attempt any of that. That's how much of a maverick, rebellious person she is. And then recently, she broke more records and then bought her whole recording catalog back eventually with the money she earned from the Eras tour.
The ultimate revenge.
Yeah.
And
in a male-dominated industry.
that's the flip side, right? And the maybe the ultimate part of the saga is that she has taken over an industry that's been dominated by crooked, you could argue, practices that took advantages of artists, and she's flipped it on its ear. It's quite fascinating.
It's extraordinary.
Yeah, no kidding. One of the other stories that you told in the book, I guess that, because I gotta make sure I get the name right here. I remember reading this. I used to co-host a weekly radio program on behalf of St. Thomas Hospital Foundation. It was called The Health Report. And so we interviewed health researchers and doctors, not only from Manitoba, but from around the world. And I can remember this study that showed doctors were terrible at washing their hands. And so the Danish study observed a hand hygiene gap at an American College of Surgeons conference back in 2012. A Danish physician attending this conference in Chicago made an unsettling discovery in the restroom. 20% of attendees didn't wash their hands after finishing their business there. So I try to tie this into, is it Ignaz Semmelweis?
Yes.
Would be appalled, yes?
Yes, Ignaz Semmelweis. So he was a doctor in Vienna in the late 1880s-ish. He worked at the biggest maternity hospital in Vienna, and it had two departments. One was with midwives, and the other was staffed by doctors. So when a woman came in to deliver her baby, depending on how busy which one department was over the other, it would be either a midwife doing the delivery or a doctor. Ignaz starts to realize with horror that a large, a big percentage, I think it was 15 to 20% of the women that the doctors delivered the babies were dying. But nobody that delivered, the midwives delivered, were dying. And he couldn't figure out what was the discrepancy. So he started to just try and, by process of elimination, is there bad air going into that part of the hospital? And it wasn't. And when women died, a priest would walk down the hall and ring a bell. He said, is the sound of that bell just terrorizing women to the point where their hearts are stopping? And it wasn't that. And he went through all of these machinations trying to figure out what was the problem. And this hospital was renowned for its teaching. In other words, it was the biggest hospital to learn to become a doctor, and students would go there. And the reason for that was they had an amazing autopsy department where they would just do, like thousands of autopsies, learning about the human body, etc. And one morning, Ignaz wakes up and he wonders, are the doctors not washing their hands when they go from the autopsy to the delivery room? And could there be particles of some kind on their hands that they're transferring to the women? So he asks the doctors to wash their hands going between those two departments. The response was fascinating because they were appalled at what he was asking. They were outraged that he would think that doctors would be killing their patients, and how dare you? We're men of renown, we're surgeons. He just kept saying, you've got to wash your hands. I know, and he couldn't prove that he was right. He couldn't, and the reason he couldn't prove it was the germ theory, bacteria theory was 20 years away still. He was ahead of the curve. And because he couldn't prove exactly what the science was, the doctors shunned him. Not only did they shun him, they humiliated him, they ridiculed him, they mocked him. He was fired and drummed out of the medical profession completely, to the point where he literally lost his sanity. And all he wanted them to do was to wash their hands. Like, it was the simplest request. And there's a sad footnote to this story. He was losing his mind at the end because he just couldn't believe that he'd lost everything. He'd lost everything in his life. His wife and a best friend said to him one day, let's take you outside, we'll take you to a museum, get your mind off things. But in reality, it was an insane asylum they were taking him to. When he realized it, he started to fight the orderlies, and the orderlies punched and kicked him, and he had scrapes and cuts and bruises. They put him in a dirty straitjacket, and he died of sepsis, which is the exact thing the women he had been trying to protect all those years had died. But let me just say this: when COVID hit, when we remember how much we washed our groceries, do you remember that part of our lives? There were articles on Ignaz Semmelweis, and he was, and his name is now said with reverence because he was right all along. Yeah.
Nobody tells a story the way that you do. You do it so concisely. I have at different times counted the words that you use in your cadence in an attempt to try and cut back on my overbosity. I can't do it. I'm incapable of it.
You know where I think
What's the trick? What's the trick?
I think it comes from my advertising background. I mean, I've spent 40 years writing 30 and 60-second commercials. 30-second commercials, 75 words. It's like a paragraph. I mean, you have to learn brevity. It was my skill set, you know. So if I had, I mean, it's impossible to analyze oneself, but I think it's the brevity that advertising demands.
So now in this new media era, where you mentioned the friendly giant thought, I just won't joke when you said 15 minutes, that a 4-year-old had a 15-minute attention span. Now all of us, present company excluded of course, have an attention span bordering on that of a goldfish. We need this constant barrage of information, entertainment. We make judgments in split seconds as to whether or not we're going to be even open to a message. Some of these, and maybe you can argue against that, but when it comes to those that are successful at capitalizing on the Instagram and TikToks of the world, what's your take on it?
You know what, I do think that there is this, I mean, I'm guilty of it too, of the scrolling thing, where you just scroll because you're getting all these quick hits. But let me say this, movies have not gotten shorter. As a matter of fact, movies have gotten a little bit longer. I mean, look at Scorsese's movies. I mean, he has 3.5-hour movies. Television shows are still half-hour. We now binge watch entire seasons in a couple of days, right? The best writers in Hollywood have moved from movies to television because suddenly they have more than 2 hours to create a wonderful arc and storyline. I firmly believe in my heart that it all depends on the quality of the story. If the story is good, people will sit for that 2 hours or however long it takes to tell that story. If it's good, they will listen. And if it's not good, they won't. So I still believe, and even books, I mean, if you listen to the audio version of my book, you're spending 9 hours. 9 hours, right? So I still think there's a place for the bits and bytes, and then there's a big part of our lives that we'll give over 2 hours, 9 hours. And story.
What's your favorite television show of all time? Or movie, your choice.
My favorite movie is easy. It's To Kill a Mockingbird. I love that film. I've watched that film 50 times. I did a commercial with Alice Ghostly once. Now, Alice was in lots of, like, she was in Bewitched and Designing Women, but she was the aunt in To Kill a Mockingbird. You remember there was Scout, what's the brother's name? Jem, thank you, and Dill.
You're at that point now?
I know,
Debbie's your walkie-talkie Google, right?
Giving all the nouns very subtly, yeah. And Dill was the little boy that visited every summer. His aunt was Alice Ghostly. So I was working with Alice, and I waited for the appropriate moment. I said, Alice, I have to tell you something. You were in my favorite movie of all time. And she goes, oh yeah, which one is that? I go, To Kill a Mockingbird. She goes, oh yes. What a wonderful, wonderful film. I go, I know. I said, can I ask you something? I said, what was it like on the set? What was it like to be physically on the set of that movie with Gregory Peck and Robert Duvall? And she goes, I don't remember. I said, really? She goes, you know what? She goes, it was 1962. I spent a day and a half on the set and I don't remember anything. And there was another actor who started it, and he goes, you're ruining it for Terry. But it was a quick gig for him. He had a small role. It was a day and a half on the set.
Oh, that's great. It's funny how the things that live with us don't live with others the same way, whether it's a regular interaction. And
I know more about the Beatles than Paul McCartney, guaranteed.
Right?
Guaranteed.
And it's so much pressure. You talk about these famous people, these celebrities, and now with selfies, and it's like, oh, did you see? He's not even smiling. This is 19,000 picture of the month. Like, he's kind of done with this whole thing. And so a split second can change your perception in a good way and a bad way.
Without question. I also like Mad Men, I have to say.
You don't say. I'm
Yeah,
shocked
I know.
that you would.
Well, but let me put an asterisk on that, because I've never seen the advertising industry portrayed accurately on television or movies. It always makes my eyes roll when I see how a writer who's never spent a day in the advertising industry. It's like, Bewitched. It's like Darren Stevens was my first glance at an ad man, which he was a jingle writer, art director, like account service, like that doesn't exist.
Which one did you like better?
Of
Bewitched.
Which Darren?
Which Darren is better?
I'll go for the first one.
Okay, and your answer's right.
But yeah. But I did love Mad Men because they actually accurately portrayed the advertising business. Now, it was era specific. The drinking probably accurate, the philandering probably more of the era, but the advertising was right on. So Matthew Weiner, the creator, clearly had somebody on board that had spent some real time in an advertising, because the relationship between the people in the agency, between the people in the agency and the clients, accurate. And I want to say this too. I think Matthew Weiner made a very interesting decision on that show, because Don Draper, John Hamm's character of Don Draper, the creative director of Sterling Cooper, was on the wrong side of history on everything. I thought that was interesting because, for example, his agency backs Nixon in the Nixon-Kennedy political campaign, which was the wrong place to be. And I remember him looking at one of the famous Volkswagen ads from the 60s, like the most brilliant one, going, this is terrible stuff. This is terrible. Of course, it wasn't. That was the golden era of advertising. And he wore a fedora into 1970, which showed how out of step he was. And I thought, what an interesting decision for Weiner to make, because he could have made him a creative genius. And instead, he made him a very troubled guy who really makes bad decisions. And I thought that very interesting choice.
I love that series. That was one my dad put me on to. I slept on it, and it's incredible how it's had staying power.
It's had staying power, yeah.
You know?
It's made him a huge star. When he walked in, interesting, when he walked into audition for Weiner, Weiner had a discussion with John Hamm, and when John Hamm left, Weiner said that man was not raised by his parents. Like he made that, and he was right. I don't know how he gleaned that from there, but that ended up being part of the storyline of Don Draper in the show, if you remember too. And John Hamm's real dad was an actor, which is also interesting to me.
John Hamm was at the Jets game today.
Today,
By the way. And of course, spokesperson for Skip the Dishes, which
Yes.
was born here.
Born here.
You have a little bit of an affection for our city, don't you?
Yes, I do. I always say this about Winnipeg, the amount of talent that comes out of this city is kind of jaw-dropping to me, because I was saying that we're from Sudbury, Ontario, my wife and I, and like hockey players are our product. But Winnipeg, it's music and art and writers and musicians. It's just extraordinary.
It's the water.
It's the water.
It is the water, yeah.
It's something. It's something.
Well, we're glad that you noticed, because not everybody does. Some people.
Hurlers.
Oh,
Jennifer Jones, yes, yeah.
100%. Jennifer Jones just here, not long ago, launched her new book, which is excellent, by the way, for those that are so inclined while you're here tonight. I've got a question here. Oh, yes. Speaking of Canada, which Canadian said advertising was salesmanship in print?
So my favorite ad man of all time, and I've talked about him often on the radio show, was Albert Lasker. So Albert Lasker was a very successful ad guy in Chicago. But Albert Lasker changed advertising for all time. And this is what happened. He was already successful. He was in his advertising agency one evening at the close of day, as you know, 5 or 6 o'clock at night. His secretary comes in with a note and hands it to Albert. And the note says, I know what advertising is, but I know you don't know. If you want to know what it is, send the word yes down to the saloon. So there's a bar at the bottom of this building that he's at. So he's already a successful ad guy, and somebody sent him, I know you don't know what advertising is. And I think most successful ad men of any era would have just done this with that note and thrown it away. But Albert was curious. So Albert sends the word yes down to the bar. And about 15 minutes later, up comes this strapping, great, handsome, muscle, handlebar mustache guy who strides into his office. And as it turns out, he is an ex-Mountie. His name is John E. Kennedy. And he was an ex-copywriter for the Hudson's Bay Company. And he sits down with Albert, and they start chit-chatting. And then he says to him finally, what is advertising, Albert? And Albert says, well, advertising is news. And Kennedy goes, no, that's just one tactic. Because I'm going to tell you what advertising is. And he said, what it is it's salesmanship in print. And while that sounds completely ordinary to you today, in that era, which would be in the 1890s, maybe, I think it was, or maybe 1900, that was an epiphany to Albert Lasker. Because what he was saying was advertising should be persuasive, and it should convince somebody to do something, give them reasons why to buy a product, and it should be a little bit of theater in there. And all of that exploded in Albert Lasker's mind, because at that point in time, advertising agencies only bought media time. They didn't create ads. They only bought the space in a newspaper or the space in a magazine. That they were just space buyers. So with that nugget from that Canadian, which is such a great part of the story, that Kennedy was a Canadian, Albert Lasker creates the first creative department. So he hires all these journalists, because there's no copywriters, and teaches them how to write ads. And from that point on, every agency created a creative department. So he went against the grain in all, like nobody was thinking that way, but Albert was curious enough to pursue it. And that's how advertising is to this day. He went on to create the first advertising for automobiles, tires. He helped elect 2 presidents. His claim to fame probably was the orange growers of California, Southern California. They were going to chop down all their trees because they couldn't sell oranges, because nobody baked with oranges back then, and you might get an orange in your Christmas stocking. That'd be the only time you'd ever literally have an orange. And he said, don't chop your trees down. Let me see if I can figure out a marketing way to save your industry. And he says, first of all, you got to change your name, because they were called it something like the Amalgamated Orange Growers of Southern. He goes, no, Sunkist. You're going to be called Sunkist. You're going to spell it K-I-S-T, so you can trademark. But then he went back to his agency, sat down with his writers, came back, and he said, here's our ad. And he showed the ad, and all it said was, drink an orange. So what he was saying was, use the juice. Nobody was drinking orange juice. And then he positioned it as a breakfast drink. This is all marketing. He said it's got vitamin C in it. It's a great way to start your day. All of a sudden, the orange growers, like their business quadrupled overnight. And to this day, look at the ramifications of Albert Lasker. We all still have orange juice as a breakfast drink, all to save the orange industry. Look at that. What kind of a thinker he is.
That's a great story. I find it somewhat ironic that I work in commercial radio and try to tell stories, and I'm interviewing or sitting down with a guy who worked on public radio that doesn't have advertising on it, who talks about advertising. But you've often said radio is one of your favorite mediums to work in. Why is that?
You know, it's interesting that when I got out of Ryerson looking for my first job, it was a recession going on, 1981. And it was hard to find a job. I put out this is a classic story. I sent out 60 resumes to agencies from Newfoundland to British Columbia, and got back 61 rejection letters. True story. One place rejected me twice. That's how little they wanted me. But I ended up eventually finding a job at a small private radio station in Burlington, Ontario, where I was the only writer. It was baptism by fire. I had to write all the commercials and then produce all the commercials. I didn't know what I was doing. But don't I fall in love with radio, like the serendipity of life. Then eventually I get a job. I work my way into major advertising agency world. I get hired at a major advertising agency to become a full-fledged professional copywriter at a big shop. And I noticed very early on that the writers there hate radio. They're afraid of it. Because at first glance, there's no faces, there's no wardrobe, there's no location, like all the things you can rely on in print and television, newspaper ads, there's no photography. And it was my comfort spot, because it's all I knew, because I just spent a couple of years writing radio commercials. And so everybody would be fighting over the television brief, and I would just take the radio one and just trot back to my office and put it in my typewriter. I'd just be a happy little bunny, you know. And what I've always loved about it was I couldn't understand why they were afraid of it, because I could be at the bottom of the ocean, I could be on the moon, I could be in your heart valve, just with some really great writing and a bag of sound effects. And if I did it right, you would come on that journey with me. So, you know, the theater of the mind cliche is really true in radio, that you become my art director. And the great thing about that is, if I say to you, picture this in your mind. It's a beautiful sunny day. You see a horse galloping towards you in the distance, and there's a rider on the horse. And the horse jumps over a brook and then gallops by you and goes by a big barn and then disappears into the distance. So you're picturing that in your mind. So questions for you. How many people saw a white horse, brown horse, black horse, female rider, male rider, red bar, gray bar? That's the joy of radio. You will picture the best of everything to you. You paint the picture. I just give you a couple of starting points, and that's the joy of it.
You can take each and every one of us to a very specific place, and it could be 95 different places.
95 different places.
Talk about personalized advertising.
And that's the ultimate goal of all ads. Can you make it feel personal?
One-to-one, right?
One-to-one.
You're speaking to one person.
Radio does that better than any other.
Okay, well, as a radio person in the commercial realm, we're a slave to the clock. 7:45. So I'm going to ask you to think about if anybody has some questions. I have one last one for you, and it just has to do just more in terms of inspiration and you know, getting what we want in life. But this whole idea, my philosophy is if you're brave enough to share with the universe what it is you really want, it just might conspire with you. You've got a similar but differently worded mantra, don't you?
I do. I did not write this, but I've clung to it. And it's there, and the world will always yield. So if you're bold enough to pursue something, bold enough to go after something, bold enough to put forward your idea, if you stick to it and don't give up, it will happen.
Terry O'Reilly, not the hockey player. Terry O'Reilly. Good bet. Have you had upgrades on Air Canada because somebody thought you were a hockey
It's
player?
funny, not whenever, but often when I make a phone call to make a reservation, that's someplace that they'll always go, "Are you a hockey player?" And I very quickly, so I tried to get him on my show for 20 years. And I had connections to the Hockey Hall of Fame. I went through the Boston alumni. He will not answer me, right? He won't. And because I've always had the feel, no, I'm not that guy. But very quickly, my sister-in-law had a friend. She works at, I think it was Hertz Rental Car in Ottawa. One day, this guy comes up and says, "I want to rent a car." And she says, "Put your name here." And she goes, "Terry O'Reilly?" And he goes, "Yes." She goes, "You're the CBC guy?" I'm just Terry O'Reilly, a hockey player. So finally,
Warranted and justified.
yeah.
Daniel, where are you, my friend? Do you want to work the microphone? Okay, yeah, that's no problem at all. Okay, preference will be given to those who've read 3 of Terry's books.
Thanks for being here, Terry. My name's Ben.
Hi, Ben.
And my mom was a radio host, so I grew up in love with radio.
Right. Hello, Mom.
I want to go back to what I heard you open with, which is that every pitch you go into in this world, and the instinct is no.
Yeah.
So what is the distillation, essence of how to ultimately overcome that?
It's an interesting thing because you never get really taught to pitch. You don't really get taught to sell in a boardroom as a rule. Even in the advertising world, you're not taught that. You think that would be a major part of your education, but no, you're not. So you have to absorb it by osmosis. So I think it's a matter, I mean, this is going to be a blinding flash of the obvious, but I think you have to watch a lot of presenters in your life if you're lucky enough to be in the room with them and look at all the great ones, and there won't be many, and look at the terrible ones and learn from both. You know, like when you see somebody turn somebody around, just the logic they use to turn somebody's opinion around, you got to think, okay, that's an amazing thing they just did there. Just try and reverse engineer it. And then when you see terrible, terrible presentations, you should see more of those. They're great learning things too. That was my biggest fear in life, was presenting ideas in a boardroom. It was a white knuckle fear for me in the early days. And I would ask other people to present my work, and their batting average was always pretty low because they didn't have that umbilical connection to the work that I had. So I thought, okay, I got to learn how to do this, and this is like my worst nightmare. But I had a great mentor. So the creative director who hired me for my first big advertising agency job was an incredible presenter, like theatrical presenter. He was a South African guy named Trevor Goodall. He was always would be like, yes, talk to me, Terrence, give me magic. I was like always that kind of a guy. But he would, so if you were presenting a print campaign, he would put it on Bristol board. And you'd always go into a presentation with 3 ideas. So so you can lead up to your recommended idea, and the client can see the evolution of your thinking. So, you'd say, this is our first idea, does this, and this, but it's not quite right because it's missing this, but here's our second idea, much better, and choose this, this, and this, but still not great. Here is our recommended idea, and here's why. Here's what it does. Here's why it works. Here's why it answers your brief. Trevor would go in with the 3 ideas on Bristol board, if you know what that is, and he would present the first idea so well that I think oh my God, he's gonna sell the wrong idea. And then he'd go, that's not quite right. And he'd break over his knee, throw it in the corner. And I'm like, watching all of this theatrics, and then he'd sell the second one, and he'd sell it so well. I go, oh my God, he's gonna sell that one, it's not the right one. And he goes, but it's not right. Crap, smash in the corner. Then he would sell the recommended idea, and I would just sit there in meetings watching this guy do this thing, and he was theatrical, and he was articulate, and he was logical, and he could field objections in a beautiful way. And just by watching him, I learned how to do that. And then how I got over my hump was I would just I would always volunteer to present. So the creative director would go, who's going to present strategy? Okay, Sally's going to do that. Who from the creative department is going to present the work? I go, I will. O'Reilly's going to present the work. And I go home and just rock in the dark with a cigarette. And I had a lot of terrible presentations, like historically bad presentations, where I learned a lot because I go back into my office and go, why did everything go wrong there? And I would just try and figure out, and he would help me out too. And eventually I got to the point, and I remember distinctly the moment where I started to look forward to presentations. And that's when I knew I had beaten my fear. And then I was able to really sell a lot of wonderful work at that point.
Hello, my name's Richard, and I just wanted to thank you for making this retired high school teacher's life much easier with one of my assignments, which I think was probably one of the better assignments. I taught business courses in my marketing class. One of my assignments was to have the kids go into the archives of London the Influence and pick an episode and write a report on it, and then present it to class. So it ate up a lot of time. Bit of a footnote to this. I've had several students come to me after they graduate, after visit, and they would ask me, what was the name of that show that, so I'm not sure, something about the name Under the Influence that's not memorable enough, but just editing it. Thank you.
Well, I love to hear that. We do get quite a bit of email from teachers that do use the episodes in their class, which we love. I'll tell you something else too. You would not believe the metric ton of emails we get from kids 8 to 12.
Come on.
That listen to the show. It is extraordinary. We can't understand it. Even we were in Victoria the other night, and there were 3 kids in the audience like this that came up and with their parents. They go, "This is my son Andrew. He's 9. He's listened to every show in your archive." And I'm like, and I always say to the kids, "Why do you listen? Why do you listen to a CBC show about marketing?" And they'll say some version of, "I really like the stories." And I think, but they're marketing stories, it's extraordinary to me, but it is like it's a full-time job answering the kids' email. Because it's never ending. You could not have persuaded me at 9 to listen to CBC, A, and B, to listen to marketing. That was not going to happen. So I am astounded by it.
Just so everyone can rest a little easier, the baseball game, if you're recording it, too bad, sorry, it's scoreless in the third. So you haven't missed anything yet, other than maybe some really good pitching.
Our bases?
The mortal sin of leaving base runners stranded, but this is not a baseball talk, nor will it become one. We've got time for another question or two.
Hi, my name's Linda. I am over 9. I've listened to all your podcasts multiple times, and when you go on hiatus, I am truly sad, and I can't wait to so just be listening again. But I have a question for you, and this is like my bucket list to actually be in the room with you, so I'm very nervous right now. So on multiple platforms of social media or like YouTube, you get these ads popping up. Now, I don't pay for the premium service. I don't know if you do. Do you watch the ads that come up, and some of them are generated by AI, or do you just skip the ads? And what's your opinion on these?
Hello, Linda. Nice to meet you. I skip ads as much as anybody because most advertising is bad, and there's no excuse for that. There's no excuse for bad advertising. There really isn't. Because if you've got creative people wanting to do a good job for you and you're the client, you should be encouraging great work instead of oppressing the creative department or Frankensteining, as I mentioned earlier, ads. There's literally no excuse for bad work. So I skip a lot of bad ads. I mean, if I spot a good one, I'll sit through it as many times as it shows up, but I'll skip a lot of ads. And I'm an ad guy. I think there's too much advertising. I've often said that on the show. I wish there were no ads in the ice on hockey games. I wish there were no ads on the boards. Like, it's just in elevators, on gas pump. It's just too much. And I think it does a disservice to the advertising industry. It's just too much.
Hi, from an advertising point of view, would you be willing to comment on the Ronald Reagan Province of Ontario ad?
Yeah. I was praying this would happen. And that I wouldn't have to ask.
You know, here, the mystery to me a bit about that ad. First of all, I often wondered, did Ford tell Carney he was going to do that? Like, it's been a little fuzzy there. Now I've heard today that Carney didn't, or tried to talk him out of it, and then apologized for it to Trump. I think Carney's threading a very difficult needle, and Ford is nuance free. Right. I couldn't figure out the strategy. Like, what was the ultimate goal of that? I know it seems like he was trying to influence the sentiment of the American people, but I'm not sure how that moves the marble forward, because Trump doesn't really listen, right? I'm saying that from what I can glean. So I'm not sure it's almost like he wanted to show Ontario or Canada that he was punching back. That was the goal, right? That somebody was punching back, not just rolling over. But as far as a marketing strategy goes, and what's the goal? Because everything should have a destination in life. Because it's not going to influence, I don't think, any voting on that issue. It annoyed Trump, and he threw another 10%. So we said, it's made it more difficult. So I'm not sure what the strategy was. I can't look at it and go, smart. No, I don't.
We have time for one more question. Is there somebody over here? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Sarah. I'm wondering about your voice. It's very distinct, and if you've had any speaking training, or you use a special mic, or what are the techniques you use to make your voice come across on radio?
I've had no training, but remember this, I was a commercial director for 35 years. So really, I helped people. I directed actors to speak in a certain way and clearly, and etc. So I think it was weird for me to be on the other side of the glass, because I spent all of my life on the non-speaking side of the glass. I don't know really how to answer that. I mean, we use very expensive microphones, and I have a great sound engineer that makes me sound great, and that's about the extent of it. It's really, I don't know what to tell you. It's not conscious. I don't know what to say.
My favorite thing that you do is when you will say someone's name or a particular brand, and you allow those of us that know who you're speaking about to sort of get a little bit ahead of everybody else with the story, and you don't give it away right away. And I get to be very proud of myself when I know exactly who you're talking about and perhaps which story you're about to share. And so thanks for that nod to those of us that are paying attention. You're not really a spoon feeder, and I dig that.
Well, thank you for saying that, because Bruce Springsteen had a great line once that I really remember. He said something like, he's talking about his fans. He said, I'm in a lifelong conversation with my fans, and I have to keep track of that conversation. I thought that's a very interesting thing, and especially in what we do with the radio show. I know we have loyal listeners, and then we have casual listeners, but I try and tip my hat to the loyal listeners by saying things like, you know, speaking of Albert Lasker, who you will know that I've spoken about before, loyal listeners, right? Like I'm really always trying to not, you know, talk about him like I've never talked about him before. So really, I'm trying to pay homage to our loyal listeners while bringing new listeners on board.
I appreciate that audio tip of the cap.
Yeah.
And a tip of the cap to you, Terry. Thank you for this. This was a thrill of a lifetime.
Thank you again, everybody. That was a lovely conversation. Thank you so much for being here too. Thank you everybody for coming out tonight, and those online as well. Thank you to HarperCollins Canada again for making this evening a possibility. Thank you to Greg Mackling for hosting, and of course, a really big thank you to Terry O'Reilly. Thank you, thank you. We're going to move on to the signing portion, which is going to take place right over here on my right. Feel free to grab a book and have it signed before visiting the cash desk. Just make sure you don't leave without paying for it. I will move a couple things around over here just to clear a little bit more of a path, but then the lineup will start right here, going right on down. Thank you again.